Hello. Alright, I'm going to try something unique here. Reading an audiobook, one of my favorite books of all time. Farley Mowat's People of the Deer, about Farley Mowat, the writer after World War II, came back and he spent time with the last days of the Ihalmuit, the inland Eskimos, in the Barrens of central Canada, about 250 miles west of central Hudson Bay. And as opposed to what I've normally done with audiobooks and other people, which is a very conventional reading, I'm going to try to make it more real and interactive. If I trip up or feel like I didn't read it the right way, I might go back. And if I have thoughts and feelings, I'm going to stop and give them. It's a little bit of a risk, but might be interesting and productive. I have to do it in 15-minute bursts because of the nature of the video processing application I have to use in order to create backgrounds. It limits me to an upload of 15-minute video sections. But here we go. Farley Mowat, People of the Deer. A couple of blurbs for praise of the book when it came out back in 1940s. We'll get to the date in a minute. This is a fascinating, indignant, and beautiful book. That's the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. The New Yorker said, "It is not often that a writer finds himself the sole chronicler of a whole human society, and Mowat has done marvelously well at the job." New York Times, a continuously interesting account of one of the least known regions of the North American continent and a collection of entertaining stories. A lot more blurbs, but I'm not going to read them. I'm using my Kindle here. Going forward. This drawings by Samuel Bryant. I'll use them as backdrops at some point when I'm doing the background video replacing. 16-page section of photographs. Let's see. Publishing 1951 and 52. Revised edition 1975. 2005 for these. This updated version I have in my Kindle. The dedication is to Francis, Ohoto's friend. Ohoto is one of the important characters in of the people. About the author. Farley Mowat was born in Belleville, Ontario in 1921 and grew up following his librarian father, Angus Mowat's peregrinations around Canada. He served in World War II from 1940 until 1945, entering the Army as a private and emerging with the rank of captain. He began writing for his living in 1949 after spending 2 years in the Arctic. Since 1949, he has lived in or visited almost every part of Canada and many other lands, including the distant regions of Siberia. He remains an inveterate traveler with a passion for remote places and peoples. Siberia, it's important. The Native Americans, their bloodline, their genetics is most closely linked with that region of Asia, Siberia, eastern Siberia, the Korean peninsula also. So that's probably why he visited. He remains an inveterate traveler with a passion for remote places and peoples. He has 39 books to his name. I didn't realize that many. Which have been published in translations over 20 languages in more than 40 countries. They include such internationally known works as People of the Deer, The Dog Who Wouldn't Be, Never Cry Wolf, which is usually what I mention to people when I'm mentioning the book, because Disney made it into a pretty solid movie in the early 80s, which I saw a number of times when I was young, and I should really watch again. Maybe even read the book, never read the book. West Viking, The Boat Who Wouldn't Float, Sibir or Sihir, Born Naked, and A Whale for the Killing. His short stories and articles have appeared in the Saturday Evening Post, Maclean's, Atlantic Monthly, and many other magazines. He and his wife, writer Claire Mowat, divide their time between Ontario and Nova Scotia. Table of contents. I might as well give a preview of that. Forward to the 1974 edition. The Why and Wherefore, Into the Barren Lands, The Intruders, The Children, The Lifeblood of the Land, Under the Little Hills, Feast and Famine, Of Houses and Tongues, Eskimo Spring, These Are the Days, The Boy and the Black One, The Shape of the Law, Kakumi. That's really the chapter that stands out to me. Kakumi is the shaman gone awry, turned to the dark side. Such a perfect symbol of what money and greed and power and civilization do and have done to people and native tribes. The Breaker of the Law, Stone Men and Dead Men, From the Inland Sea, Ghosts, Devils, and Spirits, Ohoto, Days of His Father, Last Days of the People, and the Days to Come. And there's a map, a couple of maps. I'll include those as photos somehow. Forward. On an evening when the sun hovered above the horizon's lip, I sat beside a man who was not of my race and watched a spectacle so overwhelming in its magnitude that I had no words for it. Below us, on the undulating darkness of the barren plains, a tide of life flowed out of the dim south and engulfed the world, submerged it so that it sank beneath a living sea. The very air was heavy with the breath of life itself. There was a sound of breathing and of moving that was like a rising wind. It was as if the inanimate and brutal crust of rock had been imbued with the essential spark and had risen from its ageless rigidity to claim the rights of life. The man who sat beside me stared over the rolling hordes that swept in upon us, and it was as if he stretched the hands of his soul out to the flood, the eddying, turbulent, and all-embracing flood. I felt afraid. The man beside me was no longer there. In some way that I could not fathom, he had gone from me and had flung himself into that living torrent. There was an ecstasy upon him then. The man was gone. His spirit had sought and found a union with the amorphous living entity which had possessed his land. I could not understand, for I was a stranger in that place, but the man who had been beside me was of the land. He was more than that. He was of this profound, incredible thing I was beholding. Darkness was full upon us before the man returned to me. There was no light left upon the plains, but the unseen shadows still held the faint murmur of 10,000 vital hearts beating with strength and power on every side of us. It was too dark to see, and yet I knew the man had turned his face toward me, fixed his eye on mine. He spoke so quietly it might have been that I heard words spoken from the divided voice of the monstrous visitation I had witnessed. Tuktu Mai, the words came slowly. This is the host, the legion of the deer. Forward to the 1974 edition. At the time People of the Deer was published in 1952, it was impossible for me to obtain documentary corroboration for much of the story. The book dealt harshly with the old empires of the North, the missions, the RCMP, the trading companies, and the federal government, who between them possessed all of the official, quote, evidence, unquote. They were not about to give me access to the documentary proof of their errors of omission and commission. I was therefore forced to be somewhat circumspect. Some of the names used had to be pseudonyms. Furthermore, I was sometimes forced to refrain from correctly identifying events in terms of time and locale. By 1959, when I wrote The Desperate People, conditions had altered drastically, and I was able to obtain the requisite documentation. The paper, quote, proof, unquote, of the truth. Consequently, in The Desperate People, all names used were the correct ones, and the events were presented in their actual spatial and temporal contexts. Where apparent discrepancies occur between the two books, the version given in The Desperate People is the correct one. In the foreword to The Desperate People, my 1959 sequel to People of the Deer, I wrote, "There are now belated signs of a lightening on the somber horizon of the Canadian Arctic, but this may be no more than the illusion of a false sunrise in a polar winter." It is now 15 years since those words were written, and the sunrise has proved to be an illusion in all truth. The physical disruptions which our society inflicted on the Eskimos during the first half of this century have been ameliorated to the extent that few Eskimos now die of physical neglect. Since about 1960, we have made considerable efforts to ensure that they will survive in the flesh, but at the same time we have pursued a policy which is very efficiently destroying them physically. We have made a ruthless and concerted effort to dispossess them from their own age-old way of life and thought, and to force them into the mold of our modern technological society. Assimilation has been our goal, and it has failed disastrously. In 1974, almost all Canadian Eskimos had been broken away from the support of their land, which is theirs no longer, and live clustered in modern slums, many of them hardly better than ghettos, in not many more than a score of artificial settlements along the rim of the Canadian North. Here they exist for the most part on welfare payments of one kind or another, no longer taking sustenance from the land and the sea. Effectively, they live in unguarded concentration camps, provided with the basic requirements for mere physical survival, but deprived of the freedom to shape and control their own lives. We have salved our national conscience by ensuring that they do not die any more of outright starvation, but we have resolutely denied them the right to live according to their own inherent needs, the right to function as viable human beings according to their own desires and capabilities. Genocide can be practiced in a variety of ways. The Desperate People, of whom I wrote in 1952 and 1959, are desperate still, but now they include all the native peoples of Canada, Indian, Eskimo, and mixed bloods. They are making what may be their last compulsive effort to achieve survival apart from and despite a society which will accept them only if they transform themselves into second-class simulacrums of Western man. They are fighting what may well be their ultimate battle to exist in the world according to their own concept of what their lives should be. They are making what is probably their final effort to achieve the freedom to be themselves. We've long prided ourselves on being a democratic nation dedicated to the altar of freedom. Freedom from whom? If it is only freedom from ourselves to do as we please at the expense of others, then our pious stance is even more abhorrent than that of any overt tyrant. For ours is based on vile hypocrisy. That sounds like the selfishness of some ideas of freedom in America. Freedom to do what I want, fuck what you want. To have freedom, one must give freedom. Let us put our vaunted belief in freedom to the test. Let us give back the freedom that we have taken from the native peoples of the land. If we cannot do this, then not only are they doomed, but we will have doomed ourselves as well. Because the time is short and the time is now, and that time will not come again, I am reissuing this book in the hope that it may help us to understand and to acknowledge the crimes against humanity we have perpetrated here, in our country, under the aegis of a free democracy, crimes which we are perpetuating still in a more subtle guise. FM, Port Hope, Ontario, March 1974. Just finish it under the 15-minute deadline.